Alright, so we've gotten to the point where we need to go ahead and start designing the main page of our Uber clone application. So on my screen is what our main page is going to look like at the end of the day. So to me, it looks very beautiful and brilliant. So I must say that this design is actually mimicking Taxify's app design. So that's actually where the inspiration came from. And it looks really beautiful. So this is what we are going to be having at the end of the day. Now the first thing we need to do to design this very beautiful interface is to set up the Google Maps. That's more like the first thing we need to do. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Now I usually say that the documentation is our friend. So we are going to refer to the documentation to tell us exactly what we need to do to be able to integrate Google Maps in our application. So I'm going to pull up the pub.dev website, where we usually get all our Flutter packages. So I'm going to go ahead and search for Google Map. There is a lot of options here, but the one that we're interested in is Google Maps Flutter. So I'm going to tap on this, and the first thing I need to do is to go ahead and install it. So we're going to copy this line and we're going to put it in our dependencies inside the pubspec.yaml file. So I'm going to return to Android Studio and I'm going to open up the pubspec.yaml file. I'm going to paste just the line of code we copied and I'm going to go ahead and click on pub.get. So this will go ahead and install Google Maps package in our application. So now that the package has been successfully installed, it's more like we are done with the first step. Now we need to refer back to the documentation so that we can see the next thing that we need to do. So if you scroll down here, you can see that all the necessary steps that we need to take are well outlined. Now the first thing we need to do is to go to our Google's Developers Console and enable Google Maps SDK for Android and Maps SDK for iOS, and as well as to get our API key, which we are going to be working with most of the time. So I'm going to go ahead and open Google Developers Console. So for you to be able to access this, you will need to have a Google account. That's all that is required. So this is what my Google Developer Console looks like. So yours might look a little bit different. It might not have this error. Now ensure that the Google account that you're using for your Google Developers Console is the same as the one that you use to set up your Firebase project, right? Now the next thing I'm going to do is to go ahead and select a project. So as you can see on all the projects that I have here, I have the gtaxi. So the gtaxi is a project that was created from Firebase, which is this. So I'm going to go ahead and select this same project here. Okay, so after that I'm going to go to API services and I'm going to go ahead and click on the libraries. Alright, so that's loading up for me. So I'm going to go ahead and click on libraries. Right, so you can see that there is several API available for us. There are several APIs that are available for us, but we are interested in the Map SDK for Android and for iOS. So I'm going to go ahead and enable Maps SDK for Android first of all. So I'm going to click on enable. So the API is being enabled. And bam, that has been enabled. Now the next thing I'm going to do will be to go back to APIs. Alright, so as you can see, Map SDK for Android has now been added. So I'm going to click on this place, the navigation bar, and go back to API libraries because I want to install or enable Map SDK for iOS. I haven't done this yet. So I'm going to go ahead and click on enable to enable this. Okay, so that has been done. So I'm going to go ahead and click on credentials so that I'll be able to get our API key. Okay, so we can go ahead and copy any of the API keys here. It actually will work for us. So we can simply go ahead and copy this and use it as our map API key. Alright, so clicking on API, you can now see that we have two APIs here, the Map SDK for Android and iOS. Now the next thing I'm going to do will be to go into our app. I'm going to create a new .dat file. I'm going to call it global variables. Alright, so here I'm going to paste our API key here. I'm going to call it map key. So now let's return to our documentation and continue with the setup process. Alright, so now we are done with enabling all the Google Map SDK for both Android and iOS. The next thing we need to do is to go ahead and copy this code and put it in our Android manifest to set up our Android side of things, and after that we're going to return and do this for the iOS side of things. So let's go ahead and copy all of this. So the file that we're looking for is located at android app/src main and android manifest.xml. So we're going to return to our Android Studio, and we're going to locate the android manifest.xml, src main, and this is the file that we're looking for. So where exactly are we going to paste this? So he said that we should specify your API key in the application manifest, right? So we are going to put it in the application tag. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. So I'm going to paste this inside of the application tag, and bam. Now we need to actually provide our API key here. So I'm going to go to the global variables and copy our API key. And I'm going to return to the Android manifest, and I will go ahead and paste this here. Alright, so this is basically what we need to do to set up the Android part of things. So I'm going to return to the documentation. So for iOS, we need to specify our API key in application delegate. So this is the file that we are looking for in our iOS side of things. So we need to go ahead and add our API key to it. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this line of code. So now I'm going to return to Android Studio. I'm going to go to iOS. I'm going to go to Flutter, and I'm going to go to appdelegate.m. Alright, so here I'm going to go ahead and paste this line of code that we copied. And the next thing I want to do is to provide our API key. And there's one more thing that we need to do. We need to go ahead and import the Google Maps. So I'm going to copy this line of code as well, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it here. Now we're going to return to our documentation because there's one more thing that we need to do. Now the last thing we need to do is to open up our info.plist file, and we're going to add this key to the property list. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to go to our info.plist, and I'm going to scroll down. So here I'm going to go ahead and have my key, and I'm going to paste the code that we just copied, and we need to have our closing tag, and the value is simply going to be true. Okay, so this is all that we need to do to ensure that the iOS side of things is ready to rock and roll. So now let's go back to our documentation and see what next thing we need to do. So the documentation shows us exactly how to go about integrating the Google Maps within our design. So it's very straightforward. We just need to treat it just like any other widget that we have in our widget tree. So it just makes a lot of sense that we go ahead and do that ourselves. But one thing we have in mind is that we need to have a camera position where our map is going to start up from. It's more like where it's going to show up first of all. So we need to have that at the back of our mind. So I'm going to return back to Android Studio, and we're going to try to do this on our own. So I'm going to go ahead and close most of these files. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up our main page. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the material button that we have here before. Okay, so instead I'm going to have a stack. So this is necessary because we're going to be having different widgets layered on top of each other. Just as we can see in the completed design, we have the map and we have other widgets on top of it. So the stack widgets works well for us in this particular scenario. So I'm going to have children, and the first thing I'm going to have here will be our Google Map. Now the next thing we need to do will be to go ahead and provide the properties of our Google Maps. The first thing we need to do will be to set the map type. The map type is going to be equal to map type.normal, and the next thing we need to do will be to set my location enabled, and we're going to set this to true. If you hold down your command key, you can see that there is a lot of things that you can set as properties to a map, but we want to first of all keep it very minimal so that we can see our map show up first of all. Now the next thing we need to do will be to set the initial camera position. So I can simply return back to our documentation and copy this as our camera position. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this here. So our initial camera position, I'm going to go ahead and assign K Googleplex. Now the next thing we need to do is to set up the onMap created callback. So this is exactly the function that executes as soon as our map is ready. So here I'm going to pass in Google Map controller. So I'm going to call this controller. Now the next thing that we need will be a completer. So if we return back to the documentation, you can see that a completer was used. So you're going to be making use of this completer at this point. So I'm going to copy this line of code and I'm going to return to my Android Studio and I'm going to paste it just a little bit at the top of the class. So to resolve this issue, I'm going to go ahead and import that.async. Alright, so here I can now go ahead and say controller.complete, and here I can now go ahead and pass our controller to it. So what happens here is that when our map is being created, we pass it an instance of a controller which is properly assigned when this whole process is completed, and with the instance of this controller we can further make changes to our Google Map as we proceed in the application. So let's say for instance you want to add markers or you want to change the camera position. So the instance of this controller is what we can use to do that. So I'm going to go to the top of the class and I'm going to create a new instance of Google Map controller. So here I can go ahead and say Google Map controller. I can call it map controller. So the global map controller is going to be the instance of the controller that was returned from the onMap created. So this is basically all that we need to do to set up our map. So to verify that everything works just the way we expect, we're going to go ahead and run our app on the simulator. But before we do that, we also need to go to our main.dat file, and I want the startup page to no longer be the registration page, but rather I want it to be the main page. So later on we are going to make this to be automatic, but for now let's go ahead and make the main page to be the startup screen. So let's go ahead and test this on our simulator. Alright, so our map is working just exactly the way we expect. Now to verify that this same thing works on Android, I'm going to go ahead and test the app on an Android emulator. But before I go ahead and test the app on an Android emulator, I need to go ahead and remove the app bar because we don't need it anymore. It's not part of our design. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. So let's go ahead and hot reload and bam. So everywhere is just the map. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this and test it on an Android emulator so that we can see how it looks. Okay, so this is how our map looks on an Android emulator. So it's literally the same thing. You can zoom in if you want, you can zoom out if you want. So as you can see, setting up the Google Map is pretty straightforward. Now the next thing we need to do is to go ahead and complete the design for our main page. So this will be all for now. See you in the next class.